tracking Keep Talking, then you know that Mumbai has a special place here. And you also know that in Mumbai, we are very excited because we have over 100 acres of reclaimed land, courtesy the coastal road that's going to be available to the city. Reliance Industries, that has been entrusted with managing and creating the space, actually has just revealed its plans. The BMC has also revealed its plans for the Mahalakshmi racecourse. We also know citizens who are protesting the cutting down or the destruction of mangroves as the coastal road snakes down towards the north of this city. So there's a lot going on. And if you're a Mumbaiker like I am, you will have been poring over lots of news reports and lots of presentations. So I'm going to try and understand what's going on with a special focus on this coastal garden plan that has been suggested or revealed by Reliance for the BMC. And to do that, I'm joined by Cyrus Guzder. He has many avatars, but for this conversation, I'm going to introduce you, Cyrus, as the trustee of the Urban Design Research Institute and a passionate Mumbaiker. Shloka Nath, also a passionate Mumbaiker, and she's the CEO of India Climate Collaborative. Both of you have worked on the citizens plan for the Mumbai Coastal Forest that we covered here on Keep Talking about 8 months ago. So good to see you. And now we have even more details to talk about, isn't it?
Yes, and thank you so much for having us, Anuradha.
Yeah. Thank you.
Can I start by asking you, Cyrus, a quick reaction to what you make of what Reliance has revealed?
The first point to note is that it's been the entire project has been renamed a coastal garden, whereas originally we had envisaged it to be a coastal forest. Is there a difference between these two terms? We believe so. We think that a forest would have much denser greenery and a variety of greenery, whereas a garden might have a large number of more open spaces. So in approaching the concept that we first put forward, first to the BMC and much later when we knew it was Reliance, was that we wanted to envisage a space which in the first instance was, ecologically well thought through, would be able to endure all the years ahead of climate change, and which would be accessible to people of all ages, young kids who might want to kick a football, but also lots of people who are more elderly who would rather have sat in shaded areas or used shaded pathways to walk. And once that concept began to mature in our minds, it became evident that we would be much more inclined to look at the area as being envisaged as a forest rather than as an open garden. So quick reaction is that they've allocated a good 55% of the space to what they call greenery. That sounds good, but if greenery also includes just large swathes of open space with just grass on them, and those are spaces that are prone to absorb a lot of heat, as hanging gardens and the oval do, which are invariably empty during daylight times, then we would have preferred to see a lot more greenery. But
Right.
I hope
So,
this is,
Cyrus,
I hope this is a beginning of a dialogue, and that we would
Right.
have more opportunity to comment on this.
Fair enough. But I find it interesting that the nomenclature does make a difference. So Mumbai Coastal Forest, what you imagine, and Mumbai Coastal Gardens, what you imagine, are different. Shloka, what do you make of, the Reliance, the Mumbai Coastal Garden plans that we've all been poring over the past 10 days, week or so?
Look, I want to be honest. I think this is an incredible opportunity to be able to have a public-private partnership with such ambition. It's revolutionary. I really always look to Mumbai sometimes as being a city that is a paradigm, in and of itself in terms of what it aspires to and what it can accomplish. And I think we have an opportunity here to build truly world-class infrastructure that isn't just gray. I think we have to think blue and green in terms of how we plan for the future. My hope is that when we speak to garden, we are thinking urban heat stress, and so we're thinking more shade. When we speak to garden, we're thinking of all demographics, not just young men and boys. Maidans, I think, are used far more by those populations. But for women as such as myself, for the elderly, for children, Maidans are often exclusionary, and we have to think more inclusive public access infrastructure for this city, just as much as we're thinking of climate. So those are my hopes and dreams. I think we are excited to see how this partnership unfolds, and we're here to support in any way we can.
Cyrus, if I can go through some of the things that leapt out at me, you talked about 55% of the earmarked area, which is about 130 acres. So 55% of that, according to this plan, will be for forest and wood. So that's approximately 65 acres, which is not bad. Given, I think that, your proposal, you would have liked to see 100 acres, isn't it? But this says 55%, approximately 65 acres, 25% open recreation space, 10% plaza, hardscape, 10% pathways. What is interesting is I suddenly saw that there is a petting zoo and there is a Ferris wheel, which I had not seen, in any of the previous plans that that citizens put forward. Any comment on this extreme, the extreme northern end of the coastal road at this point of time, which is Worli, and the Ferris wheel and the plaza area that's going to come there, because that is definitely going to be paved or hardscaped, which is the word they're using.
I agree. Petting, what is it called? Petting zoos, Ferris wheels, and the like, certainly didn't figure in our concept because, and by the way, you forgot that there's also an aviary or a sort of a bird park, which is the form of a caterpillar shaped caged area that goes through one of the green areas. I think the point is that this type of facility involves hard construction, as you correctly said. It consumes energy. It probably is not heat resilient in the way that Shloka described so well just now. Um, there is a tendency today, and we see that in the racecourse, which we might come to a little bit later, that in the present the view of governments and municipalities all over the country, they tend to regard beautification of areas and making areas available to the public as requiring hard construction, as requiring the construction of entertainment facilities, into which category the Ferris wheel falls. And our view is that actually what the public really wants is they want a place where they can enjoy themselves with relatively less external interruption. And whatever you say, anything that's hard surfaced is going to become a heat radiating in the evening time, and people will particularly want to walk. So we feel that actually, if we're looking at a coastal garden or forest, the less of these amenities there are, the better.
Is this cast in stone now, or will there be more dialogue? Because this was a presentation to the public, which happened at Priyadarshini Park, and then, the media got hold of it. But is there scope for dialogue going forward? Will there be a lot of dialogue? When do they begin?
My understanding is, and I would have hoped that this would be the beginning of a dialogue process with the party that has now been chosen to implement the project. But we rather got the impression, and I hope it was a misimpression at the public meeting, that there's been enough consultation with the public, and now this is the project that's going to go ahead. And we also got the impression that it would not be easy to approach, and probably not even appropriate to approach Reliance directly, as this all comes within the BMC. So I think we have an absolute clear intention that we want to continue to have a dialogue with the BMC, and if possible, through them with Reliance. And all we need to do is to offer our thoughts and suggestions from the point of view of the people who will use the facility. And I think they ought not to feel threatened by that. In fact, they should be open to that.
Just to add, I think Cyrus has hit on such a valid and important point. A lot of the public consultations that were done in the past were with specific, technical experts, so communities of, let's say, architects or landscape architects, for instance. We would love a more, sort of general discourse with the public, because At the end of the day, this is, publicly funded tax money. This is public infrastructure. The usage of it is going to sort of be dependent on citizens. And I wanted to say one more thing that, as we sort of march towards this very unpredictable future when it comes to climate and the vagaries around sort of, the climate crisis and what it will bring. We've done multiple studies globally where it has been very evident that actually what we are cutting ourselves off from is access to nature. And it is nature that is, ultimately going to bring us back to ourselves, whether, in terms of healing, in terms of being able to feel more connected to each other, to ourselves. As societies, as we urbanize and as we develop, we need nature more than ever. And cutting ourselves off in terms of access is something we really deeply need to reflect on, as citizens and as society. And I think here we have a tremendous opportunity to actually rebuild that connect, to use green infrastructure in a way not only to protect ourselves from what is coming in the future, what is already here, but also just for mental health, for our peace of mind, the right to breathe clean air. Why would we cut ourselves off from all of these wonderful benefits?
The Supreme Court made it very clear when it allowed for the coastal road to be built and land to be reclaimed that this land could not be commercialized. Given that the BMC has chosen to get Reliance Industries via the foundation to do this as their CSR, they've also said that this will not be commercialized. And yet, when you know that there is a Ferris wheel, there is a plaza, and when there are areas which will allow for people to gather, will we see this becoming in some way sort of a closed space where the public can't get through? I'm going to just throw up the illustration of the Geo Garden, right, in BKC, which the same industrial group has developed with the MMRDA over there. And while it is open to the public, it does host a whole bunch of events. It could be weddings, it could be massive exhibitions, conventions. And at that time, I don't think the public can access things very easily. So is there a fear of something like that here? What are some of the things that they need to be mindful of, Cyrus?
We've had a remarkable NGO by the name of Nagar, which has spent the last many years mapping and studying open areas in the city. They have actually come across a very unfortunate approach of the government, which is to look at anything that resembles a spot of greenery, even if it's a traffic island, or even if it's the Willingdon Club golf course, which is severely access limited. And they put that all down as green. And despite that, we have a very minuscule percentage of the green space that even our own building laws would require. I think that considering all of that, I think that the open spaces that this particular coastal road project was intended to address, and it was very specifically addressed in the applications they made to the Department of Environment to grant them environmental permission, which, let's face it, would not normally have been granted to a highway on the seashore, and for which actually the Department of Environment tweaked the regulation a little bit to permit this, was that actually they would return open space for the recreation and for the enjoyment of the public without commercial development. So I think if we read both the letter and the spirit of that requirement, it is that really they're looking for a type of a park or a forest, a park basically, which is forested, rather than an area in which a whole lot of entertainment and other associated amenities were to be stuffed. Now, I think a lot of this is going to go to the racecourse, and I don't think our group has studied that to any great degree. But we have seen that with regard to this area, it's going to attract large numbers of people anyway, because in the Haji Ali area, you've seen what happens on the weekend, starting on a Friday evening. Hordes of people come along. And then if you start giving them opportunities to have joyrides of one kind or the other, then actually speaking, doesn't that mitigate against the requirement of all the others who come to that area to enjoy, as Shloka said, to enjoy nature? If you want entertainment, there are other areas to go to. And just want to take the cue from what Shloka said. If Reliance, and I don't know if you remember in our last conversation, we actually said we were probably gratified that Reliance agreed to take this up because they would have great execution capabilities. And if anyone can green 100 acres, with experience in landscaping, it would be a conglomerate like Reliance. And so if they have this capacity to landscape an area to this scale, and they are doing it through the area of CSR, which is very much dedicated to helping communities rather than earning money for the company, then we felt that if we could get them to, as it were, if we could be on the same page as them in one way or the other, we could end up with a project, or let's say put it this way, with a coastal development which would set a model to the rest of the country.
Shloka, Cyrus just spoke about the fact that, joyrides and, is that in conflict with someone wanting to access nature and sort of, get back in touch with their core self, right? So, alluding to the points you made. What would you say if people say that that's an elitist argument, that when you look at what is being proposed, you have at the one end, you have a Ferris wheel and a plaza where you have festivities and, maybe fairs or whatever you like, where people can gather, social activities. You also have children's parks, you have, other pathways, you have places to play, open areas. So isn't this what a city would require across board, across demographic segments, and definitely across socioeconomic class? Is this an elitist argument if you were to say that a people seeking joy rides can't coexist with people wanting to commune with nature?
I think it's an important question. And the way I would answer it is I think we should ask the people what they want. I feel right now there's a lot of assumptions being made about, what citizens are looking for. What I can tell you, and this is not an elitist perspective, I work in the climate field. We sort of poll regularly with civil society organizations and nonprofit organizations and grassroots organizations on the ground all the time. There is an immense need for protective infrastructure in this city that will provide shade and relief, mostly for informal workers. Air quality is most harmful to vulnerable populations, those who live in informal settlements, workers who are exposed to the outdoors constantly, day laborers, security guards, etc. Who is thinking about their health and their needs in this respect? They are perhaps the most vulnerable and at the front lines of climate change. It's us, the elites, who get to escape to our air-conditioned towers and our air-conditioned, ACs, cars and offices. So I think the elitist argument is bunked, or rather can be debunked very quickly when we think about who is really facing these impacts. Number one, and therefore, how do we build, as I said, infrastructure and really climate resilient infrastructure that will protect these communities, number one. Number two, we do need to really speak to citizens. The need for public discourse on public amenities is, I think, something that we just need to build more into our civic engagement and culture. I think the decisions that are being made around how we proceed, while very hopeful, just need more public consultation. I don't think we can leave it to just a group of architects or a group of, skilled experts. I think we do need wider citizen discourse. And the third, I just want to say very carefully and very clearly, the argument here, or rather the viewpoint or perspective that we're offering here, is not that public amenities or more public infrastructure is bad. Whether it's a Ferris wheel or whether it's an amphitheater or plazas, whatever it may be, we're advocating for looking at the real challenges the city faces and therefore bringing about infrastructure that really represents a balance of needs. Build your public amenities, but do so in a way that provides people in buffering from what they are facing right now and what they will face in the future. Why do the plazas have to be concrete, for instance? We have more than enough, I think, understanding and technical knowledge today to be able to build incredibly sort of ecological infrastructure, using nature to be able to provide the same amenities, world-class design, and really build Bombay into a model for future-proofing infrastructure in an era of immense climate crisis. I just think we don't have to think about this from a very old, sort of past version of how we sort of build our cities. I think we need to be innovative and look to the future.
I think Shloka answered that perfectly well. And I want to add to that. The best example is to see what do people actually appear to be looking for today, and just take a nice walk on Marine Drive over the weekend from Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and take a look at the demography of the people who are sitting on that seawall, who are walking up and down. They're not elite. They're not the elite. They are the middle class and even the lower income groups of the city who have simply escaped the awful, congested, dense, polluted localities in which they live to come out and have a breath of fresh air. And surely that the coastal road, which is envisaged in a way as an extension of that promenade, should be able to continue that idea, which is to allow people to come out and enjoy fresh air and nature. I don't think they're all looking to have entertainment on Marine Drive. I think if they had just a little bit more space, the promenade were much larger, that's something that they crave for. And so I think that we're not we're not in any way feeling guilty that we're saying we should encourage people to enjoy nature. Why do people rush off in these buses to places like Mahabaleshwar and Khandala on the weekend? It's to get away from the city. If we have that opportunity here, let's not implant more pieces of the city on one little spot that we have an opportunity to transform.
I would just say one more thing. The way I sort of see the future unfolding, I fear that only the elite will have access to nature. I'm actually trying to flip this on its head and say that we are literally removing the common man's access. And by common man, I genuinely include everyone who lives in this city, our access to what is the most basic fundamental right, our right to nature. It is disappearing before our very eyes. And very soon, it is going to be only those who can afford to leave the city, only those who can afford to go to, national parks, etc., who will be able to experience the joy and the vitality of nature in full force. So I do think we need to claw it back as a very essential commons good. We need to understand that belongs to all of us and we have to protect it. So for me, it's really, we're losing coexistence. And I think that's a much more fundamental problem that we're not addressing today.
And I think both of you address this argument that is put forward often really very, very effectively. But let's move to some of the other things that we are hearing at this point, and that is, the Mahalakshmi racecourse development. We've got 2 letters within a week from the Mumbai Architects Collective, more than 100 architects, urban planners protesting to the plans that have been seen by the public. Any thoughts on that, Cyrus and Shloka? I will talk to these guys also, but I just thought, since you've been looking at the city for some time now. If there is something that you want to say on this.
It is really a matter of concern. It's not, this is actually, I think, something that has to be navigated with a lot of care. The racecourse is one of the largest carbon sinks for this city. I don't think people realize how much of a green lung it is. And the idea that we're going to mess with the depth of the soil, the roots, in terms of how embedded they are, and try and build an underground car park and infrastructure, to me is I just question where these needs are coming from. It's a well-known fact that a future-proof city is one where, the rich use public transport and not one where the poor afford more cars. I think the more space and infrastructure we build for cars, the more cars will appear. It's like a never-ending drug and cycle. And again, this is well
And that's
known.
also,
Sorry.
no, and Shloka, that's also because when you are building this kind of infrastructure, you're starving the buses
Exactly.
of the kind of support they need and other public transport.
Exactly. So, in fact, to me, why are we constantly focused on this very elite infrastructure for this city that is, in fact, not going to solve the problem in the long term? It might in the short term in terms of providing immediate relief for parking, but what it will do in the long term is only add to more cars on the road. And this is well understood urban transport and planning theory. I mean, we know this, we've seen this play out in numerous cities across the world, and yet we are repeating the very same philosophies here that we have known to fail elsewhere. So to me, that doesn't make any sense. The fact that we're going to interfere with what is a vital green lung in the city that is open to public access and not look at increasing biodiversity there, not look at, again, building amenities in a way that might actually enhance the existing green infrastructure, but rather deplete it, is one that I think we should all be very, very concerned about. You're right about the letters. I think they are, if the entire community of technical experts is also standing together and saying that this is a moment of extreme caution, then I think it's a real wake-up call for everyone in the city, and we need to really pay attention to what's happening here, because we are moving on multiple fronts in terms of, as I said, moving into sort of more and more grey infrastructure, and they're not going to protect us from what's coming. They're not going to help us breathe better in this city. And those effects are here and now. It's not 15, 20 minutes, years away.
Cyrus?
Oh, well, it's been so well expressed. I just thought it was so ironic that in response to a great, well-known architect's plan for the racecourse, you had a whole bunch of other architects criticizing it severely. And I was so delighted to see this group of architects who were leveling the criticism as basing their arguments essentially on the environment. What they said is, if you're going to excavate a racecourse, it's all going to be concrete underneath. You're not going to be able to put enough soil. You won't be able to grow enough trees. Besides, as Shloka mentioned, it is really a big thing. The racecourse sits much below sea level. It's just that the Hornby Vela stopped the sea from coming in all the way to Baiduni. So effectively, it's a vulnerable area. At the same time, it has this wonderful, advantage of being able to absorb the rain. And for that, you must ensure that you allow the soil to remain undamaged and able to perform its function of absorbing very heavy rains and floods. So I think this particular proposal is environmentally flawed. And I thank the architects for taking the initiative to fire the first salvo. And I think there will be other similar criticisms that will emerge. So I hope that project will be substantially reviewed,
reassessed, because if you look at the presentation again that BMC has put out with that Hafiz contractor has put forward, everything is happening there. There's underground parking for 5,000 car parks, I believe. There's, all the sports facilities that are being created. There's a convention center. It's just intense, the kind of activity that they've planned there. So we'll have to keep our eyes on that. Quick question on the mangroves, Shloka. We saw, I ended up signing petitions. We're all signing petitions, which is good because that's one way we can express ourselves besides commenting on social media. But what do you make of the mangroves? Over 40,000, I think, are going to be destroyed. And the Bombay High Court has given them the go ahead, though the petitioners, I think, are still looking at legal recourse to see if they can find some technicalities on which to prevent that destruction from taking place.
It's bizarre. I mean, the way we're sort of conceiving of, how growth and development is happening in this city it's so disjointed and disaggregated. I think what we have to fundamentally understand about mangroves is that they are coastal resilient infrastructure. This is not wasteland. For some reason, the perception of this as being land that has absolutely no use and is just sitting there ripe for the picking is to me like the part that I find the most mystifying and quite honestly aggravating, because they serve a very, very, very fundamental purpose. And by literally uprooting them from where they are, and then the court saying that we can transplant or plant trees, hundreds of miles elsewhere, has zero correlation to what the needs are of, this city and also what purpose they served and where they were. So again, my sort of earnest, appeal is that for the authorities in charge to realize that, this is literally storm surge infrastructure and flooding infrastructure that is being uprooted, that we are not replacing in the places that they are right now. So transporting those trees elsewhere or planting them elsewhere will not help the city in any shape or form.
Cyrus, you want to just tell us what you're making of the current, there's so many plans that are in motion. I think we've had the BMC, the civic elections after, the long delayed civic elections. So you have elected representatives, though the administration really does remain the same in terms of the people in power. And you have so many plans in motion. So you have the Mumbai Coastal Forest, you have the Mahalakshmi racecourse. We also know that Port Trust land is now going to be made, in bits and pieces, going to be available to people to develop. And there is this large scale monetization of public land that we are seeing, and that is what the government, whether it's at the state or at the national level, seek to look at for revenues. So I want you to sort of give because you've dealt with it for a very long time.
Anuradha, you've actually thrown the whole of the urban planning challenges of Bombay at us just now. So, yes, the city is going through a process of completely disorderly, irrational, and unplanned, inadequately planned development. Because we're developing the city in silos, and we're developing the city. There's so many other forces at work. So, if we just look at first of all the infrastructure expenditure, which we can start with, what should strike us is that if you look at the BMC budget, which I think was announced today or yesterday, the total value of the infrastructure expenditure exceeds its total revenue today. So it would require them to go out and raise debt and funding. They've got all sorts of ideas, some very sensible and some crazy, about how they're going to raise money. And the crazy ones are not going to help them to raise money. But what they will do is, let's start with one simple thing, the underground transport network. Okay? We have 7 lines now going to go up to 9 or 10. They've been being built separately by 3 different authorities. They don't interconnect. They don't run on a single ticket. Sometimes you have to walk very considerable distances to get to the destination, which is actually labeled as the station in question. And then they are being financed by debt. Now, we know that almost everywhere in the world, including in India, no metro system returns the cost of its capital. Some of this debt is foreign debt. So we are now going to be, as time goes by, over the next 15, 20 years, we're going to saddle the city with the most unbearable and probably unrepayable debt. And has the potential to bankrupt the city. And that hasn't prevented the authorities from wanting to build more flyovers, more extensions to the coastal road, etc. That's one part of it. But the other is this enormous redevelopment process that is taking place, which I think is contributing so severely to our AQI problems. Um, Here we have an extension of what was the Slum Redevelopment Act, which allowed you to give free accommodation to slum dwellers in return for commercial sale. Now they're putting that commercial sale on the plot of land by pretending the buildings are dilapidated and need redevelopment, but we're knocking down structurally sound buildings simply and increasing density. One would not object to that if they were correspondingly adding to the amenities, if they're widening roads, increasing water supply, handling sewerage. Now we've got a big water supply project coming up. How do these happen? They come by going enormously long distances and damming rivers with flood areas where actually tribal communities and other farmers are living. So what we're doing is we're displacing people in the countryside in order to bring water to South Bombay. So when you consider now these aspects, the way you're going to indebt the city, the way you hurt the countryside all around, the way in which mangroves, by the way, there are at least three environmental groups, Vanshakti, BEAG, CAT, fighting furiously in the courts against mangroves. And their principal argument is, why did you build that road there in the first place? Then if you decided to build that road and you're going to cut mangroves, then you should minimize the amount and allow us to consult with us with regard to a new alignment. And if you have to cut mangroves, you need to cut 42,000 of them, and you jolly well transplant in the same locality. Or you transplant in an adjacent locality where the mangroves serve the same purpose that they were originally serving. Ms. Shloka is absolutely right. You don't need to go to Chandrapur. In fact, even if you went another 80 kilometers out of Bombay, it would be inappropriate. So that's another area. But then if you look at the way in which the rest of the infrastructure of the city is being planned, the problem is that our planning authority lacks trained and qualified town planners. Until as recently as 15 years ago, there were only a half a dozen qualified town planners for a city or a conglomerate that was going to house 22, 25 million people. One wonderful example, you built a second airport, you had no links to the airport. Now you have to spend a couple of thousand crores to build a mass transit link from one airport to the other airport. Just an example, there are so many of these. So I feel that you need to unify the planning under a single planning authority, and you need to empower that authority. And that authority must be in constant dialogue with the public about what the needs are. And if you look at the city of Mumbai, BMC, for years we've said that there is no accountability because the mayor is an elected figurehead. If you made the mayor accountable and elected, like a Mr. Mamdani in New York, you can bet that if Mamdani doesn't deliver, he is now going to be re-elected. And in fact, long before he isn't re-elected, he'll suffer tremendously. But the fact that he has been elected makes him accountable. So we also need that type of legislative reform. So you've actually opened a Pandora's box in talking about the planning of Mumbai. There's a lot to do. And I fear that we're not addressing it at all. We're merely spending money because increasingly states are prosperous. And the more money we spend, the more we be tempted to raise property taxes and to find all sorts of other ways in which actually to increase the cost of living of our people, while we're frankly reducing the quality of life.
Should we end the conversation on this note, or Shloka, do you want to?
Conversation now. We should end the conversation on what a wonderful opportunity the coastal forest is going to give us, and that we hope that it will come to fruition as a wonderfully landscaped area for all of us to enjoy.
Shloka, closing word. You want to just leave us with a thought?
I think Cyrus has sort of articulated, the moment we're in so beautifully, as he always does. And he's going to be very embarrassed by this, but what he's done for the city is nothing short of monumental, like his entire career. And it's the reason, he's been such an inspiration for folks such as myself. It's interesting because, when you work in a space like climate change, or in environmental activism, or you are ultimately, I think, partly delusional. I think you have to be where you're operating on optimism and hope. And I think that is the seed you have to nurture and keep alive, because as difficult as things may be right now, you have to see that possibility of a better future and truly believe it. I would just say, to everyone out there who's going to watch this video, don't lose sight of the fact that you do have agency, you do have a voice, and speak for what you want, the city you believe in. We all ultimately are doing this because we love our city. We love Mumbai.
Yeah.
So thank you for the opportunity, Anuradha.
We will keep talking and we will keep tabs on what Mumbai is getting and what people who are supposed to govern Mumbai are offering it. Thank you so much, Cyrus. Thank you, Shloka. We'll keep talking.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Anuradha.
Anuradha.